The early morning light filtered through the large windows of the airport, bathing the terminal in a warm glow. Miss Eleanor, a graceful elderly woman in her early 80s, stood in line for her flight. She had waited for this moment for months, eager to meet her grandchildren after years apart. Her outfit, a soft blue dress, a cozy gray cardigan, and a pearl bracelet she had inherited from her mother, was simple yet elegant. Her white hair was tucked neatly under a small scarf, and her hands, though slightly weathered by time, held a leather handbag that had belonged to her late husband. This trip was significant for Eleanor. It was her first flight in over a decade, and her first time aboard a luxury airline. Her daughter, wanting to ensure her comfort, had arranged everything. "Mom, this is your time to relax and enjoy," she had said. Though Eleanor was initially reluctant, she ultimately agreed, grateful for the opportunity to travel without the hassle of long car rides or bus trips. As Eleanor made her way to the boarding gate, she couldn't help but notice the well-dressed crowd around her. The polite but curious stares didn't escape her attention, but she had long since learned to ignore such judgments. Her focus remained on the ticket in her hand, row 3B. The thought of being so close to the front of the plane made her smile. This was a special moment for her, a rare treat in her life. When her group was called, Eleanor slowly made her way to the gate. She could hear the hurried footsteps of the other passengers, but she moved at her own pace, savoring each step toward the aircraft. As she handed her ticket to the flight attendant, a woman in her late 30s named Melissa, the attendant gave her a polite but distant nod. "Have a pleasant flight, ma'am," she said, though her tone lacked warmth. Eleanor didn't let it bother her. She walked down the jet bridge, the sleek plane gleaming under the terminal lights. As she stepped aboard, the luxurious interior caught her attention. Spacious seats, polished finishes, and soft lighting. She marveled at the extravagance, appreciating this rare moment of comfort. When she reached her assigned seat, 3B, Eleanor stopped to admire the view. The window seat was perfect for the long journey ahead. She gently placed her handbag on the floor, but before she could lift her small carry-on bag to the overhead compartment, she was interrupted. "Excuse me, is this your seat?" came a sharp voice. Eleanor looked up to see Melissa standing nearby, arms crossed, eyeing her with barely disguised irritation. Melissa was tall, with a professional, yet cold, demeanor. "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied, showing her boarding pass. Melissa glanced at it, then nodded curtly. "All right, but please move quickly. We need to keep the boarding process moving," she said, a hint of impatience in her voice. Eleanor took a moment to reach for the compartment. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the unfamiliarity of the surroundings. A passenger seated nearby, a middle-aged man, noticed her struggle and quickly offered his help. "Let me assist you, ma'am," he said with a smile, effortlessly placing her bag above. Eleanor expressed her thanks, but Melissa only sighed, rolling her eyes as she moved down the aisle. As Eleanor settled into her seat, she couldn't help but feel the cold atmosphere around her. Some passengers glanced her way with a mix of curiosity and indifference, while others exchanged whispers. She ignored it, keeping her gaze ahead, focusing on the happiness awaiting her at her destination. Meanwhile, Melissa seemed determined to make Eleanor feel out of place. She walked down the aisle, casting occasional glances toward Eleanor, her gaze filled with an unspoken judgment. Eleanor tried to stay focused on the warmth of her family reunion, but the uncomfortable tension in the air was hard to ignore. Unbeknownst to everyone, Eleanor's quiet presence would soon set off a chain of events that would change the course of the flight and the airline forever. As the flight preparations continued, Eleanor noticed that her seatbelt wasn't quite fitting correctly. She hesitated, then decided to press the call button for assistance. Melissa arrived shortly after, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "What is it now?" she asked, her voice barely masking her frustration. Eleanor remained calm, smiling gently. "My seatbelt seems stuck. Could you assist me?" Melissa sighed loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. She fiddled with the belt for a brief moment before dismissing the issue. "There's nothing wrong. Just pull harder," she said with a dismissive wave, turning away before Eleanor could respond. Later, Eleanor realized she had forgotten to take her medication and needed a small cup of water. She pressed the call button again, and Melissa returned, this time visibly irritated. "What now?" she asked, arms crossed. Eleanor politely explained her need for water to take her medicine. Melissa rolled her eyes and let out an exaggerated sigh. "We're not even in the air yet. Water service will begin once we're airborne. You'll have to wait," she replied curtly. Eleanor tried to explain, but Melissa was already walking away, muttering something under her breath. When she returned, she slammed the small plastic cup onto Eleanor's tray table. Eleanor thanked her quietly, took her medication, and tried to relax. The tension in the air was palpable, but Eleanor remained composed. A few moments later, Melissa returned to Eleanor's row, this time with another flight attendant. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Melissa asked loudly, her voice laced with condescension. "This section is for premium passengers." Eleanor, surprised but calm, held up her boarding pass. "Yes, I'm in the right seat," she replied softly. Melissa grabbed the ticket, examined it closely, and after a moment, returned it to Eleanor. "All right, but next time, make sure you board with the correct group," she added, walking away without another word. Eleanor overheard whispers from Melissa and her colleague, their voices dripping with disdain. Her heart sank. She had faced such treatment before, but it still hurt. The final straw came when Melissa returned once more, this time in a tone that bordered on command. "Sit back and buckle up. We're about to take off." Eleanor, though weary, nodded and complied. But the tone had crossed a line. Just as she was about to close her eyes, seeking some peace, a calm voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" A man in the uniform of the captain stood at the front of the cabin, walking down the aisle toward them. All eyes turned toward him. The captain, a tall man in his early 40s named Captain James, approached the row with authority. "Everything all right?" Captain James asked Eleanor with a warm smile. Eleanor, a bit taken aback, nodded. "Yes, thank you. It's just that I've been treated quite rudely." The captain's expression hardened as he turned to Melissa. "I suggest you treat this lady with the respect she deserves. Every passenger, regardless of age or appearance, should be treated with kindness." Melissa, stunned, opened her mouth to argue, but was met with a firm silence from the captain. The surrounding passengers, now visibly supportive, murmured in agreement. Melissa, red-faced and embarrassed, slunk off to the galley, leaving Eleanor in peace. Eleanor sat back in her seat, a quiet sense of victory washing over her. The flight continued smoothly, and when the time came to disembark, she stood first. As she walked down the aisle, the passengers who had witnessed the tension now stood in silent respect. With her head held high, Eleanor stepped off the plane. She had endured much, but in the end, it was her dignity and the intervention of the captain that had triumphed. This was a moment of quiet victory, a reminder of the power of standing up for oneself.